grandma made great homemade biscuits. And when I asked her like, hey, grandma, how do you make biscuits? She's like, oh, you know, just some of this and some of that, and you do this, and there it is. And I'm a recipe girl. Like, I need instructions, so that just never quite worked out for me. They were too wet or too floury. They didn't have any taste. It didn't go well. So I finally have a recipe. It works. I have instructions, which I still look at every single time I cook them. So the things we need for this is I have all-purpose flour, and I actually use unbleached flour. I have salt. I have, let's see, this one is the baking soda, baking powder, butter, buttermilk, because it's what makes them so good. So I'm going to get started today. So I went ahead and measured out 1 cup of flour. I'm just going to dump it in my bowl. And then with the salt, it is, see, I told you recipe every time. I cannot remember anything. A half a teaspoon of salt. An 1/8 of a teaspoon of the baking soda. And so I actually don't have an 1/8 of a teaspoon, so I just kind of eyeball it with my 1/4 of a teaspoon, and oh, it works. Though I like instructions, I mean, we're not that strict about it. And then we have 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. And I know there's some recipes out there that don't have baking soda in it, so I don't know. I don't really know the science behind cooking necessarily, which is probably why I'm a recipe girl. But I looked it up, and it has something to do with acidicness and the buttermilk, but you want like the baking soda when you have buttermilk. So like I said, I usually just kind of follow directions, and I'm okay with that. So after I put these ingredients in here, before I put the butter in here, I want to kind of mix that up. Some people grab a whisk, but I'm going to need to cut the butter in there anyway, so I just grab my butter cutter and kind of whisk it together that way. Since I usually end up like dirtying every dish in the kitchen, that's one less dish I do dirty. Okay, so Kerrygold butter, and this is going to be 3 tablespoons of butter. I just kind of tossed it in there because we're going to use the butter cutter to cut it together anyway. And for I know there's videos out there where it's like, if you don't have a butter cutter, you can use a fork or this or that. And it just never worked out. Butter cutters are not that expensive, and you need one in your house because it made my life so much better. And so you're just going to cut that in there, and you want it to kind of be like a cornmeal texture, and you'll know that when it's done. So and this recipe is it's more like a 2-person recipe. Most recipes I've kind of cut down to fit our family, which is just the 2 of us. So if you have more people in your family, or you want extras, or you're just like super hungry that day, then go ahead and feel free to double the recipe. I have made it like that when I made like a bigger family meal, and it works fine. So okay, so that looks pretty good. Next is the buttermilk. I'm going to take a spatula and kind of mix all of that together. And this is going to be, it's going to be a little bit of a sticky dough. You'll kind of learn what looks like it's too wet or too dry. And if that goes either way, you can always add just a little extra buttermilk or a little extra flour. And you'll kind of start playing around with it a little bit. So once you've kind of mixed this together, we'll be ready to put it out and cut the biscuits. But I completely forgot to mention to preheat the oven. So we're gonna preheat that to 475. Alright. Okay, so I'm just gonna set this down here. We are gonna flour the surface and then put the dough down and start cutting it into biscuits. And that's just to keep it from sticking. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and butter my cast iron skillet. So as I cut the biscuits, I can go ahead and put them in there. Okay. So once you have your flour or your dough down, I'm just going to fold it over. So I'm going to fold it a few times, and that's just making sure everything's mixed together, but you don't want to overwork it. Okay, and then I'm just going to pat it out. And start cutting my biscuits. And I just kind of stack them around the pan. They don't have to touch. I don't know. For some reason, I like my biscuits to be kind of crowded in there, but I know some people have them a little more spread out than that. And after you cut some, you can refold your dough back together to finish using it. And if the dough sticks to your hands, you just want to use a little bit of flour to keep it from sticking. And that last one, usually I just hand form and just tuck it in wherever it'll fit. Okay. So the next step is we're going to put it in the oven, and that will be for 11 to 15 minutes. My oven usually is 12 or 13 minutes. I am also the world's messiest cook, so there's always tons of flour and everywhere by the time I'm done, which is why apron's a good idea. And be careful not to burn yourself. I have several times on cast iron. Usually I leave something over the handle so I don't just grab it, but hopefully other people are smarter than me. Okay, so these look delicious and they're so hot. There's a lot of things you can put on a biscuit. We're huge biscuit and gravy fans. Jelly, of course, but I really like honey. There's nothing better than local honey and a fresh, hot biscuit. This looks amazing. If I want to toot my own horn, and I will, because it's my horn. So that's homemade biscuits. It sounded scarier than I found out it was once I started making them. So now I'm sold. No store-bought canned biscuits, no frozen biscuits. Homemade biscuits are the way to go, and you won't go back. So go try it yourself. Let me know if it was easy for you, if you struggled, if you didn't think it was worth the extra time and you'd rather go back to a canned biscuit. Thanks for watching.